thank you very much for tuning in. This is Rugby America's North Try and Stop Us Forum #1 here in November. We've got 3 fantastic events happening over 3 consecutive Tuesdays here as part of our Rugby America's North Unstoppables campaign here throughout November, where we're promoting all of the amazing stuff being done throughout North America and the Caribbean as part of Women's Rugby Caribbean. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it on to my co-host for this evening. Lauren Rothwell is one of the World Rugby Women in Leadership Scholarship winners. And Lauren, can you just walk us through a little bit about what we're getting about this evening and take us through our panelists?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Welcome. As Brian said, my name is Lauren, and I am one of the World Rugby Scholarship recipients. In 2019, I was awarded the scholarship along with several other incredible women, and it's been really incredible to see the game of rugby grow and develop on and off the pitch over the past several years. So tonight we're going to be speaking with some amazing women who are changing the face of rugby in a professional capacity, taking on major positions and contributing to the game in many different forms. I'll give you a brief intro on each of our panelists before they give us some insight into their experiences and accomplishments. So first off, we have Emilie Bydwell. So originally a Canadian, Emilie began playing rugby in high school in Quebec. She then moved to the United States to pursue her degree and ice hockey career at Brown University, where she also played rugby, earning a 3-time Women's Collegiate All-American honors. She was also selected as the 2007 Collegiate Player of the Year. Emilie made her Eagles debut against England in August 2008 and went on to compete in 3 World Cups, 2 15s and 1 7th, retiring in late 2015 after a career-ending injury. Just before the end of her career, Emilie spent a season abroad playing for the London Saracens, helping them to win the Premiership title that year. Emilie has also coached across all levels of rugby in the United States, including high school, collegiate, and senior, leading teams to multiple national titles. Emilie served as the director of rugby at Seattle-based Atavis, where she worked to develop player pathway systems across the United States. She has coached across the age grade USA representative sides, including the high school All-Americans, under-20s, collegiate All-Americans, Falcons, and just took the USA Women's Sevens teams to the 2019 Pan American Games in Peru. Emilie served as the team leader for the Women's Sevens team at the Rio Olympics, and she's currently serving as the USA Rugby Director of the Women's High Performance living in Chula Vista. She's committed to building environments that support people and teams to maximize their potential. So Emilie, over to you.
Thank you. I don't know what I'm going to talk about now. So no, it's really good to be on here, and there's some really incredible women to be alongside on this panel. So I'm really excited to hear your stories as well and learn from you over the next hour or so. So I mean, from my perspective, you've heard like my background now, so I can't just retell you that. But what I think what I'll probably talk about more is just some of the transitions that I went through in my career, whether it be my athletic career or my either my athletic career or my my career, like my professional career, because I think some of those have been the things, it's at the transitions that I've had, whether it's in sports or professionally, that have kind of been the like defining parts of me, and also, has really helped me be the leader that I am in terms of what I'm the opportunity I have right now in the game. So I think probably the first one that I'll talk about, I guess, that I think, so I transitioned from 15s to 7s, got back from the 2010 World Cup, and emailed Rick Suggett, and was so excited about, he was doing great things with the team, and he had created this program that you wanted to be a part of that program. And so and he didn't write me back. So I was just like, okay, well, I guess I'll just keep emailing him. And eventually he emailed me back. And so I was able to go out to camp and kind of get, dip my toes in, and, ended up just thinking, okay, well, they're starting the residency program. So I just want to be out there. They can't train with 8 people. So I've just got to get out there. So I got in the car with my dog, and we drove across the country from Boston to San Diego. So I got a job teaching, which was great. Really, the best coach development I ever had was teaching, the time I spent teaching there. So if you have any opportunity to teach, if you're an aspiring coach, it's a great development tool. But what happened with Rick and with my experience there with the Sevens was that I was just not really making the team. Like I had a couple opportunities where I got to play, you'd go and play a couple minutes, and, but I was really enjoying the experience. I was getting a lot out of it. But I just wasn't really sure where I fit in. So, I remember getting back from Dubai, and I had a feedback session with Rick, but I had only played 2 minutes, right? So I was just like, what is he going to say? So he sat me down and he said, all right, well, Bites, I'll tell you, if you want to make the World Cup team, because the World Cup was, 8 months away, you need to be the best effing water carrier in the world. And so you're sitting there as like an aspiring, World Cup player, and your coach is not even talking about your rugby. They're telling you that you need to be the best water carrier in the world. And so I initially was a little like taken aback, and then he, then he went on to explain that I needed to be the person that watched the game so closely that when I went on to bring water to my teammates who were playing, that I could tell them something that was consumable, actionable, and would be enough to change the course of the game. And he also used that opportunity to tell me that he thought that I should be the next women's Sevens head coach when he was done playing. So, or done coaching, sorry. So that was really a pivotal moment for me. Obviously you're going to like train my butt off to not have to just be a water carrier, right? To be able to be on the field and contribute on the field. But that moment, was really where I think I began to believe that I could be an international head coach, because I had somebody believe in me. Right. And then B, think about the game in a way that I could make that type of an impact without actually physically being on the field. So really, I was already working with Atavis at that time and coaching, and, and really just took the opportunity to grow in the Seven space, but also, grow in the coaching space. And coached every level. And I think one of the things that is challenge for people that are aspirational head coaches, you always want to coach at the highest level. You're like, okay, well, what's the next level I can coach at? What's the next thing I can do? But the thing that gave me my, really best coaching experience was, with younger people, with people new to the game, crossover athletes that are just coming into the game. Because if you only coach at one level, you have to develop your tool set. You have to, or toolbox. You need to have a range of experience. So that was just something, that I set out to do. But I think I'm almost done my 5 minutes. So I had another antidote, but I will leave that for if somebody asks me a question later, where I'll talk about my transition from coaching to administration. But I don't want to take anybody else's time. So we'll go over there.
Okay.
Great. Thanks, Emily. Next up, we've got Tiff Faaee. Tiffany is a Samoan American living in New York City. She is currently the head coach for the men's and women's program at Monroe College, program director for Roots Rugby and the New York Rugby Youth Club. She is also the first ever female coach for a professional men's rugby team. Prior to coaching rugby, Tiffany played for the USA Eagles, serving as a World Cup captain. She also played in the Women's Premier League for the New York Rugby Club. So over to you, Tiffany.
Thanks for that. Ems, you could have totally just added in your last bit there, but we'll save that for later.
No, I wouldn't do that. Your turn.
So first of all, again, like everyone else here, super grateful for this opportunity. I think the more of these we can, put out there, again, to just for representation and to just have a voice, and take space, the better it would help, develop women. So excited and appreciate the invitation to be on here. So a little bit about me. Yes, I found rugby in New Zealand, started off with touch rugby for church, you know, and yeah, everyone was reluctant because being a Polynesian girl, it's sort of frowned upon to, you know, want to play sport. That's a boys' game. But I think because our touch was co-ed and I started scoring most of the points, the church was sort of a bit more supportive of me wanting to play rugby. And then, you know, when I wanted to ask my mum if I could play some tackle, there was a little bit of more support there because I'd already, you know, been playing some touch in front of the church. So yeah, and then it started off as a space for me to really find my voice, you know, because again, with, you know, the cultural barriers that were how we're raised at home, you know, and it's quiet and very humble and it's great. And, you know, and obviously those are all skills and character building that you need. But then, you know, rugby allowed me to explore like how to be a leader and learn other skills, as I'm sure we'll touch on it, which is why we're so passionate about this game. So moved over to New York and played for New York Rugby Club, and I was very fortunate that, you know, I had some really good coaches in my corner who put my name forward to Pete Steinberg, who then invited me to my first camp at JMU. And it was a huge eye-opener for me because, you know, playing in New Zealand, I had an international cap for rugby league for Samoa, but you know, again, the game's very different here. So it was very cool for me to learn rugby again, to play the American style, but try and figure out how I can still use the skills I've learned, you know, growing up in New Zealand, which really put me on the fast track. And again, my journey is very unique. I like to tell players that sometimes it's just about doing your best with what's in front of you, and you just don't know what opportunities are going to present themselves, you know. And so whereas a lot of the other players are like, they set this goal, it was a 5-year goal of theirs, whereas we were in the same room, we were playing the same team, and I was like, I had no idea I'd be here a year ago, you know. So again, talking about pathways, there's so many different ways that we can all, you know, achieve or reach these goals, but sometimes we don't know what, you know, what's around the corner for us. So yeah, and then obviously coach at Monroe College. I like Emilie, I really appreciate what you said there, because it's definitely helping me as a new coach, developing a lot of crossover athletes, you know, and especially Monroe, where it's in New York City, you know, the challenges are very different with field space, little space. So we're trying to be creative with, you know, how we can simulate as many rugby scenarios as we can. And then obviously the opportunity to work with Rugby United was huge, not only for myself, but just for women in general in sports and in all roles, right? It's been, I think there's been a lot of momentum in the last couple of years for us, but it's about us not being complacent and knowing that there still needs to be more opportunities. So yeah, through Rooney, I was very fortunate. I had a trip to Nairobi this time last year. I got to be a part of a panel with the United Nations there when with their segment on using sport to promote inclusiveness and gender equality. So very fortunate to be on that panel. And then I got to meet a lot of players, actually soccer players, right, who'd never learned about rugby before. And it just reminded me, because, you know, obviously in Nairobi, they're still playing soccer, and some of them that met me were just in tears because, again, in some of these smaller, you know, nations, we're way ahead, right? And I came away thinking, wow, like it's easy to, we are very busy here, and rugby is just a bit of a grind at the moment because, you know, we're competing with a lot of other sports, but we believe it's a sport that could grow. But I really came back with the perspective, just the appreciation of what we're able to do, and we're passionate about it, but not realizing the impact we're having outside, right? So some of those women are watching us and they're like, wow, you get to coach men, and it blew their mind. It's something they never thought of. So yeah, came back really hungry, wanted to focus more on women, especially the younger youth. And yeah, which is why I helped out on a few programs. So I think that's my time, right? yeah, and then obviously, USA Rugby World Cup next year for the women. Very, very excited. Hopefully I can be there in the stands and support. So thanks, guys.
Awesome. Thanks, Tiff. Next, we've got Kwanieze John. Quinnis is a sports administrator and sports educator specializing in sport development and mass participation programs. Quinnis has worked with the Trinidad Rugby, focusing in women and girls development as the founding director of the School Girls League in Trinidad, which started in 2010. This evolved into her role as a program manager for the Get Into Rugby RAN, which she did from 2015 to 2019. Since then, Quinnis has returned to her studies in sports organizational management. Over to you, Quinnis.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm happy to be here amongst lovely women, and thanks for Rand for, putting this forum on. So my story is quite interesting. I initially wanted to model, so at 16, but with my mom saying no, I joined the next sport that came into school, and that was rugby. I had no idea what it was, but it was something to keep me occupied. And I fell in love with the game through my first failure of not making a team after that, and just, persevering and being determined to be part of the Trinidad and Tobago national team. So thereafter, I got injured in 2009. And I looked back and realized that I was the youngest on the team. And I was like, well, this is so much fun. Girls are really missing out. And that is where my desire for the growth of the women's game started. And it's from that desire and having a support system like my club, Royalians, and challenging them as well, to get involved in growing the girls' game. And I think it's from taking that step, that being bold enough to say I could do that, and believing that, I'm not too young to give back, because I was just about 19 when it started. I had no coaching experience, so to say, but I've learned pretty well from my coaches, and I said, okay, I think I could do this. And one thing led to the next. What seemed like hard work were just opportunities opening up for me. And having that willingness to learn and that willingness to grow really contributed to my growth in the sporting space. And of course, having tremendous support, because it can be very difficult in the Caribbean, especially when it's volunteer-based primarily. So there isn't an ambition to say I'm going to work for that organization. It's really volunteer-based, and so for us in the Caribbean, it's really about having a passion for what we're doing, and utilizing that passion to create more opportunities for women and girls in the game, and also creating opportunities for men as well. So, it's not just, it's really about growing the game generally here for us. What sparked my interest in sport organizational management, and this is a different sphere of leadership, and I know Emilie delved away from administration, but it's so important about sharing her transition in administration, but it's so important to understand the dynamics that an organization culture and development has towards the growth and development of the game. And that's really sparked my interest, and why I chose that study, because for the game to grow, there has to be organizational change and adaptation to facilitate that. And so I know we're supposed to talk about how we started, where we are, and where we're heading, and that's about where I'm heading, to support the organizational changes that is required for us in the region to grow the game exponentially.
Great, thanks, Quinnis.
Yeah.
Our next panelist is Katie Wurst. Katie is the Director of Rugby and the Head of Women's Rugby Coach at Queen's University in Charlotte, North Carolina. Katie holds a Doctorate of Education in Kinesiology and is certified by the Association of Applied Sports Psychology as a mental performance consultant. She also serves the rugby community as a World Rugby trainer, focused on coach education, and is an advocate for the emerging sport movement for inclusion of women's rugby within the NCAA athletics. Over to you, Katie.
Thank you so much, Lauren. And it's just a complete joy to join this group of very accomplished women on this panel. And just hearing so much, I can so relate to so many of the great points brought out, to Emilie talking about teaching and Quinnis talking about the opportunities to grow and develop and find new avenues, and just Tiff speaking about the unique backgrounds or the spaces that we're in now working. So I want to talk about my story in terms of how I frame my sport experience and my educational journey, because I think they go hand in hand fairly well. So I started as an NCAA multi-sport athlete at the Division III level, so competition to where I had always played many sports. So I had a great conversation with another teammate of mine that had transferred to the university and said one of the best experiences she had was participating in this sport called rugby. So I was thrilled just to learn about everything it was. So I was always the basketball player that was just a few inches too short, but really aggressive. And I was always the softball player that was just a little bit not quite fast enough, but could hit, right? So I was strong enough and had these different aspects. So rugby seemed to me as the opportunity to also cultivate my interest in a career in athletics and sports. So I knew that that was a career path that I wanted, but at the time, rugby was emerging in the US. So I sort of just made it a life goal to be excited about saying, I love this new sport that I learned to play. I bet I can make that a career path. So we started out with the opportunity to look at internships, and I did every internship I possibly could. One of the challenges was often sports-related internships interfered with my rugby participation as a top-level collegiate athlete. So I went to the Geographic Union and said, how about we do an internship that involves rugby so I can do both? And that's exactly what happened. So I started that career path from a lot of the work I did as an intern with the Wisconsin Rugby Union, led to connections with USA Rugby, which eventually offered me the opportunity to be employed at USA Rugby. I also did a number of international tours with my collegiate program because our coaches were very connected internationally. So that exposure led to me getting a chance to live in Ireland, playing for the Munster provincial side, and just having this really expansive opportunity. So when I interviewed for the opportunity to work in game development at USA Rugby at the time, I had this international experience, in particular in youth development. So that opened the door for me. While I was in Ireland, I also took as many coach certification courses as I possibly could because they were everywhere. So had that opportunity to engage there, and then was employed at USA Rugby for 6 years. Had the privilege to work on the program called Rookie Rugby, which was eventually named at the time, the IRB Development Program of the Year, which then transversed into the Get Into Rugby program and took at different levels of it. But that was something that was a pure joy for me because as a college student athlete, I always felt like, where was this sport when I was younger? So the opportunity to field phone calls from young women and say, hey, we're working on this programming to make sure that you can start playing younger was something that was really critical to me. So as I essentially believed that this was my dream job, to work for rugby at USA Rugby in the organization. And then I started to think, I bet there's other dreams out there too. So at the time, that's when I learned about the NCAA emerging sports movement and my own experience as a multi-sport NCAA athlete and seeing sort of the disparities and the differences between opportunities in the states for resource, coach development, everything else. I made that the new mission, was to say, how can we place rugby in the echelon of opportunities for women in athletics. So through there was my master's degree in sport and exercise psychology, because I had the benefit of working at USA Rugby and being involved with a lot of the high performance programming. So I would attend the World Cups and see what I could do in terms of the mental side of the game. So that made my interest in sport and exercise psychology something that was really critical to me. And I saw how coaches were developing and how we could include the world of sports psychology into that coach development piece. And I think that was really critical for my own evolution. So I then was afforded an opportunity by a student athlete that I coached to move to Southeast Asia and coach in that part of the world. That's where I got a chance to coach men, and then really worked on my referee development skills as well too. And that was just something that was completely game changing in terms of, to which Tiff talked a little bit about where we are in the world and what we can do and how much we can utilize resources. So going to different locations where the aspiration to just join World Rugby was something that was a huge piece of it. So I think that really speaks to RAN's mission to be all inclusive of all unions. So had that experience, moved back to the US, and really found myself interested in, just like Emilie, the teaching and education side of coaching. So pursued a doctorate of education and had a traditional programming, and then switched to a completely asynchronous online format, which is actually very timely considering COVID. So at that time, the reason I made that switch was because there was a conflict with being able to attend upper level graduate courses and coach. So it created an avenue to where I could do both. So, and this is the greatest piece about the job I have now, is because of a lifetime of development work led to the dean of students at my school called me out of the blue and said, here's an opportunity for you to come talk to our athletic department and see where you can fit. So that created an avenue to where that's the current role I have now. I also have the entire time to help me pay the bills. I worked as a coach educator within the system within World Rugby. And now I'm at a place where as a trainer, I get to teach the educators who then teach the coaches. So that work, which I've done, really helps in terms of recruitment, athletic development, and professional development we do here. So in short, they've all tied together in some way. And in the current role that I have now, I get to help young women be game changers and pioneers. And if I think back to some of my mentors like Nicole Lavoie at the Tucker Center for Research on Girls and Women in Sport, this is what was taught to me every day, is to create opportunity and hold space for women and girls in sport.
Amazing. Thank you, Katie. Our final panelist tonight is Julianne Zessman. Julianne played rugby for 18 years, primarily in the fullback position. She represented Canada for 11 years at 3 World Cups and considers her career highlight to be the 2014 World Cup, where Canada took home a silver medal, which is their best finish ever. Julianne started refereeing in 2018 and in 2019 made her debut on the Women's 7 World Series circuit in Glendale. After Glendale, Julianne continued on the 7th circuit, reffing at the Dubai Sevens and the Cape Town Sevens, where she notably reffed the final. Additionally, Julianne also reffed at the 2019 Pan Am Games and the RAN Sevens. So over to you, Julianne.
Awesome. Thank you, Lauren. Yeah, thanks to you and Brian for putting together this awesome panel. It's been super interesting to hear everybody's stories, and and to hear everyone's experiences in women's rugby, but also in men's rugby, is particularly interesting. I think that at times we can feel lonely in those spaces, but to be on a panel like this with each other and to recognize how much we have in common and how much of a community we have in each other is actually really special. So yeah, thanks for making this happen. For me, I will admit I never wanted to be a referee. I think as players, we don't really like referees. And I definitely fell into that category. And it wasn't until someone actually tapped me on the shoulder and suggested that it might be something that I like, it might be something that suited my personality, that I decided to give it a try. And that was after I retired in 2018, and I was just looking for ways to give back. I'd spent some time coaching, and I loved coaching. But until I picked up the whistle and actually got to be back on the field, I didn't realize how special that was. And what I loved so much was just that, was being on the field. There's no greater place on earth, and being in the rhythm of the game, like literally being a part of the feel of the game. was something that was so unique, and I knew that I wasn't going to get to do that my whole life, and so I wanted to sort of take that opportunity when it came to me. So that was the start of my journey with that shoulder tap in 2018, and then from there, a number of things happened. I mean, I'd say when I decided to take it somewhat seriously, the most important thing is that I found myself a mentor, and this is something in all different areas and all different roles that we need. And that was just someone that I could be really vulnerable with, and someone that I trusted, and that I could sort of share the challenges that I was facing on my journey. And I was really grateful that there was one person, and actually in the end multiple people, that were willing to help me. And then with that person's support, I actually started putting myself in uncomfortable situations. And I think this happens for a lot of us, where we have to stretch ourselves a little bit if we want to do something that's different and that's unique. And being a female referee is definitely one of those things. I think that often as women, not to stereotype, but typically we do have this quality of humility, and sometimes that can show up as not putting ourselves forward for roles that we are maybe not quite qualified for, or only just qualified for. And it's often the case that the men will put their names in the hat, even if it's a bit of a stretch for them. And so in stretching ourselves with support, putting ourselves in uncomfortable situations, this was how I sort of worked my way through refereeing high school, provincial, national level, and then the opportunities that I got from Rugby Canada were super important in terms of like actually getting me onto the world stage. So I got the opportunity to referee at RAN Sevens, which is a big platform where they select a lot of referees to go on to the World Series. And then also at Langford Sevens, there was like a little side high school tournament, and that's where I was spotted by one of the World Rugby selectors, and eventually ended up on the series. But that I think it's important that, you know, we're putting ourselves in these uncomfortable situations. And I mentioned humility earlier, and I think the humility is super valuable in the lead up to those opportunities, in terms of being humble enough to prepare and recognizing that when those opportunities do come, we need to be ready to go for it. And so I think that those are skills that we learn as athletes in terms of how to figure out how to be the best version of ourselves. And those were the sort of the skills that served me in terms of getting myself into a position to referee some really, really awesome opportunities. It's incredible to see right now what opportunities there are for female referees. We're seeing in professional men's rugby some groundbreaking performances. We've had our first female in Super Rugby in New Zealand, and soon to be South Africa. Joy Neville will be a TMO on a men's international game this month. We've got, who else? All over the world. Basically, like, this is it's a very fertile ground right now. And that stuff's incredible. And that's the visibility that we need. For me, though, my happiest memories to date have been refereeing in the grassroots. And I think a few other panelists have mentioned this already, but just the opportunity to actually impact the game and to create an environment where girls feel empowered to play. As a referee, you literally get to be there. I know the coach is like screaming from 50 feet away, but I get to be there and to give them prompts and to give them instructions so that we can let the game play on, and they can pass and they can tackle and they can learn to love the game. So that is super rewarding. I think that it's just really neat to hear, I think, a lot of common themes across all these roles. And I'm looking forward to hearing more from all the other panelists. So back to Lauren for the Q&A.
Excellent. So that is a fantastic introduction as to, the panelists that we have here and the opportunities that we're trying to discuss and promote here throughout North America and the Caribbean. The first question, which has come in through the chat, is to you, Emilie. With regards to the late great Sluggo, the comment that you said at the end of your little speech there, where he told you to be the water carrier and the best water carrier. A, how did you not take that as an insult? B, how did you rally that into a positive movement for yourself, and what was the next steps for it?
That's a good question. I mean, I think he probably did a good job following it up with, because it was in the same conversation when, he was talking to me about my ability to be, that he believed that I could be an international coach. So I think that probably, the fact that those two messages were either delivered in a, pretty at the kind of the same time, I think helped. But I mean, it's kind of one of those things where I don't know, I wouldn't have, I mean, maybe I just had the relationship that I had with him, but like, you can take it however you are going to take it. Right. And I think that a lot of it has to be around like what your mindset is in terms of like, because it did two things for me at the same time. One, I didn't want to be a water carrier at the World Cup. I wanted to play at the World Cup. Right. And then two, but if that was my role, it being the water carrier, I was going to do that in the best way that I possibly could. And that was by, making sure that I, really knew the game as well as possible. Right. So that's pretty like synonymous with what you would need, the skill set you would need as a coach. So I think that is, I took that in the, in the way that, I think he intended, but if he didn't intend it that way, I would never know. But it was definitely a pivotal moment for me in my career, and so yeah, I guess that's kind of how it went for me. But it's a good question. I know when I tell everyone laughs when I tell the story, but I think people, it's a hard thing to hear as an athlete, right? But it also, like, my transition into coaching while I was still playing made my transition out of playing significantly easier, because there was something because that transition, especially for, the players that have played at an international level, that's something that within the program, the USA program right now, we're spending a lot of time figuring out how we can support the players that are full time and get them ready for their next phase, because it's a really hard, hard transition to make. So I think that having those conversations with me really early helped me with the transition. So long-winded answer, but hopefully it gets it.
Next question. Thank you, Emilie. So of our 5 panelists plus Lauren, how many of you have mentors? So that's 6 for 6. So Zuss, you touched on it. Anyone else can jump in here, but how does one go about getting a mentor, and how do you find the right person that can, help guide your career?
I can jump in just to build on mine. Mine just started with coffee, and that's how it happens a lot. Is like, you connect with someone, or you like someone's vibe, and you just say, hey, can we go for coffee? And like, imagine like if I asked any of the women on this panel, like if someone reached out to you and said, hey, can we grab coffee for 20 minutes and talk about my future in rugby, we would be like, oh my God, yes, I'm there in a second. So just, yeah, that for me, that was the first step. And then you get lucky sometimes.
Excellent. And just a reminder to all of our attendees, if you'd like to put forth a question, type it out in the chat box and I will bring it up to the group. Back to you, Zussman. The next question was from Rue, someone you know well. What was the biggest challenge in having been an elite player and then becoming a referee?
I think the biggest challenge is going from being like a so-called expert in your field to being a beginner. And that process of starting fresh and knowing nothing. And like literally I was going to my first game and I didn't know what to pack in my kit bag. Like I was like, and then I showed up the field and I was like, what locker room do I go? Like, I don't even, what, is anyone gonna talk to me? Like, not knowing anything. Like, and these are like basic things that, and I was like, who do I ask? I don't even know. And so it's like, that's sort of like the physical side of it, but then also mentally, like being okay with making mistakes and and sometimes making mistakes on a big stage. Yeah, so I think that just that process of being, 31 years old and being a beginner again in a sport that you've literally been a part of for, more than half your life. Yeah.
Well said. Tiff, question for you now. Can you speak some more to your role in developing good humans as rugby players, not just the best rugby players?
Oh man, I said that. No. I mean, that's a good question, and I think that's something that I'm learning. Like every season, I'm still looking back just the previous season and cringing at some of the things that I've said to some of my players. Because I'm such a passionate coach, and I speak off the just off the cuff a lot. And I think I'm very fortunate that my players or the athletes I've worked with know that I'm just a genuine person, and that I'm very open that, hey, look, if I'm not getting it right, you just have to be transparent with me. But for the most part, especially my college team, it's very easy with some of them, because they can't even do things like show up on time, some of them. So I'm very big on just behaviors and trying to reinforce it, I guess. It's really important that we establish our values, and each program, again, being unique. My Monroe boys team, what they value is very different from the Monroe women's team. So it's me listening to each unique group and then making sure I'm very intentional with, reinforcing, what we've established at the start. But for the most part, I believe it's building that trust, and I know it has to come from me first. And it's, we're not always going to get it right. But I think no matter what level I've worked with, and they're all different, right? Like at the Rooney level, I was like, well, these guys are semi-pro, and they're playing at the highest level. Like, surely they're going to be on time. And then in New York, it's unique again. You can't really use that because they're all working at the same time. But even at that level, the characters are very different, right? So I'm not the head coach there, but it's very good to observe and watch how Mike Tolks and Keys were dealing with the dynamics between the leaders in the team. But I think it's establishing what the values are, and then just making sure that you're going back to them each season, because it changes, every season as well, depending on what your goals are. Yeah, hope that answers your question.
Excellent. Quinnis, over to you now. A question that just came in from the chat. How have you been able to translate your experience at the IOC to the grassroots rugby in Trinidad as an emerging rugby nation?
Yeah, so what was interesting is that when I got introduced to the IOC movement, it's just when rugby was becoming an Olympic sport. So my involvement in the IOC there really helped me to get the message of Olympism to the rugby fraternity and into the spaces that I work in. So it because again, rugby is such a value-based sport, it was an easy language to speak for people to understand, and therefore help them develop their programs as well as strategies to get them to attract people into rugby now that it is an Olympic sport.
Excellent. Katie, to yourself now. Did you ever think about quitting the plan of pursuing a career in rugby? And what was one of your biggest challenges, and how did you overcome them?
That's a wonderful question. So it isn't the easiest pathway in the world. There aren't, especially in the US, there aren't unlimited amounts of opportunities of jobs. Like for those of us who are looking for employment and opportunities in sport, I think for me, what has always helped was to pursue multiple pathways for career opportunities. So if you look at the makeup of the United States, I sort of knew from the club sports area that I knew that there was no way it was going to be sustainable for a career that could pay the bills all the time. So I constantly thought about higher education as an opportunity, or in working with USA Rugby, I would think maybe they'll listen to me more if I generate more education and more degrees, more experience. And I found that to be early on. And I think that that is changing so much now from my time about a decade ago, when you see women like Emilie and women like Tiff and others making this huge impact and being the leaders. So I think some of the challenges were sometimes feeling not heard at points in time, but that really just sort of the same way that Emilie was echoing, hearing, you know, you're going to be the water carrier, also hearing, hey, maybe you're not ready to take this course, or maybe you need to work on this. So that always just, for me, was sort of a source of saying, if you don't think I'm ready, what are the things I need to do to get there? Or how can I work around that to create my own opportunity? So I also think like pursuing higher education created the avenue where I knew that one day I would be a professor at a university. And if I work as a professor at a university, then I'll be able to coach a collegiate program and pursue my passion and do both. And the unique aspect of what happened is all the grassroots work that I had done was when an NCAA opportunity was presented, it was the grassroots individuals that made the connection for me to actually have rugby be my full-time job. So instead of just pursuing the pathway of saying I want to coach at the highest possible level, it's always also thinking about what you can do at the ground level, because that development eventually, through the network of communication, when an opportunity opens up, somebody will speak highly of you and you'll get that opportunity. So I would say the biggest challenge really is just persisting and consistently keeping through things when you're not quite seeing what that opportunity is, and just being patient.
Amazing, thank you. Next question is for Quinnis and Tiff. How would you get girls who think that rugby is a boys' sport as a result of their background to try it and make it more interesting for them?
So my experience has been, I think we take it for granted that girls like challenges, you know, like to be challenged. And it's really about meeting them where they are. So if they see, or if they believe that it's a boys' sport, I usually ask them to compare to other sports they think are boys' sports, and if they can identify that women that play their sport, play that sport. And then I said, okay, so do you think you would be willing to try? And if once you try and you create a fun environment for them to explore and believe in themselves, they then, you know, are gung-ho, as we like to say, on the sport. So that has been my experience, especially at the grassroots level. Girls generally like their own space as well. So in the initial stages, you want to keep the programs separate for most times, especially those who are more girly, as we like to say. And you create their own space and get them to be comfortable in their own skin. And then you introduce the vigors of the contact game. But I won't recommend you just throw them into contact. They're gonna run for the hills.
Yeah, from my experience, luckily I can find a lot of games on YouTube now. So I watch a lot, I show a lot of videos, right? Because they don't believe me and they see me and I'm like, you know, just retired from Eagles, and they're like, whatever, coach, like, what do you know? They think that I was born this size. But yeah, I showed them some clips. I showed them 7s, 15s, and I pause it. I'm like, look, they're, you know, different sizes, you know, and some of these players, I use USA a lot, and I talk about how I personally know some of them and how some of them switched direct to college. But yeah, it takes some convincing, especially from players, especially at Monroe. I get a lot of women from Jamaica and Barbados, you know, but it's also, I like that challenge of trying to, you know, because they're keen, but they're scared of being hurt. So I like to find out why they think it's a boys' sport. And most of the time it's the language of where they're from. You know, their mom doesn't want them knowing that they're in the gym or that they're out there, you know, potentially getting themselves hurt. So, and then once I know where the root is from, and if I can spend time with them and they're really interested, then, you know, it's just a conversation, and I take it easy with them. You know, I invite them over, they can watch. I I do, if there's a majority of new players, I'll probably won't use a rugby ball, you know, just throw around a tennis ball every now and then. But like Kwanieze mentioned, it's just making it really comfortable for them in the first couple of sessions, you know. They come back again, then we're pretty set.
Good. So the next question is to the group. What would you suggest to players who may not be elite athletes and how to find their path as an administrator? Katie, I'll pass it over to you first because you mentioned that that was very similar to your story.
Well, I think that is something unique, that there's the perception that that's something that you have to have. And I believe that there are many ways to enter the pathway to be involved in. And I think there needs to be kind of a reframing of saying that you're the elite administrators, right? We always talk about how there's a space for everybody within rugby, and not everyone. There's a very small percentage that plays for your national team or is an elite level athlete. So there's so many more individuals that are a part of this game and this sport. So the best piece of information I could say is volunteer, show up, be there. Like, I am the person that was on the sidelines watching Emilie Bydwell destroy people on the field and be in a great place while also filming, broadcasting, looking at literally anything that we could think of to do. Okay. And through that, it helped expand my skills as an athlete too. So the honor of my life is to play at the women's premier level in the US. That's literally the reason or the pathway of how I sought out my master's degree. So sort of creating that space to where I could have a place to live with roommates, playing at a high level of play, while also sort of seeing and understanding in a similar way to say, I'm really going to take my skills into the place of developing more coaches, developing more referees. So I think that it essentially comes down to being a person that's very helpful and very useful and finding a way to just advance your skills. Because, and also really to what Julianne talked about is like, we're very humble as young women. And I know this because I interview coaches to hire. And I absolutely will talk to a list of 20 women who says, I'm not ready. And I'll talk to a list of 100 men and they say, hire me tomorrow. And I can tell you that that list of 20 men and is maybe who's in that level, but for women, there's a significant portion that are so talented and they just aren't quite thinking that they can. The answer is 100% you can. So you don't have to be the most elite level individual to step up and give it a try. Even if you show up and you go to the wrong locker room or you haven't packed your bag appropriately, that's okay to do. The point is that you're there and you're trying it out. And then when you try, more women see you trying and they want to try too.
Chazelle Fleming from Trinidad and Tobago just said in the group text chain here, I noticed a huge difference showing my girls international games with our national team. I'll just open this one up to the group. How influential is it being able to show, the Women's World Series, the Olympics, 15s test matches, World Cups, and how much video do you show to your teammates, to your athletes, and as you're trying to grow the game?
I think it comes back to, if I see it, I can believe it. I think that's what it comes down to, especially for the girls and women, because when I started off as an administrator, so to say, primarily I was seeing male administrators until I got involved with the IOC, with the Trinidad Big Olympic Committee, and then I seen more female administrators, and I was like, okay, cool, we could go this way. So that was basically pretty much the attitude. So I think video and visuals are very important to show for the development of women in the space.
Next question is over to Emilie. Emilie, you've developed and lead a successful program now at USA Rugby. Can you speak to some of the challenges of creating a high-performance program in the US where rugby is still unknown by many?
Yeah, it's definitely, I have more gray hair than I did 3 years ago. I think that the challenges that we had or that we've had over the last few years may not necessarily be around, well, COVID's one, but then let's talk pre-COVID, because I think everyone's dealing with that. I think the challenges that we had really initially were around the sustainability of the program and how we were going to build something that's going to leave a legacy, as opposed to like, we don't want to have to recreate the wheel every time we have a turnover or a transition or a quad. So one of the real focuses for us, both 7s and 15s over the last few years has been about how we can establish sustainable programs that ultimately they continue to grow, as opposed to having to have these kind of resets, however many quads, however many years apart. And then the real challenge that comes along with that, trying to drive sustainability, is that our budgets are very much like year to year. Like, we'll find out what our budget is for next year, finding out, this week, and we're kind of, a month away from the close of the year and the start of the next year. So that is probably like, a really significant challenge. And I think that I'm lucky. I think we're lucky in the U.S. Like, we do have, we have the USOPC, who provides, investment to the 7s programs. We have, we have high performance investment now coming to the women's 15s team. So we are, I don't want to kind of complain, but it is one of those challenges when you're dealing with, when you're trying to build for multiple quads. Because that's now really how we're looking at things, is, we're looking at we want, obviously a gold medal in Tokyo, but really, what is Paris, and how do we make sure we win a gold medal at home in LA in 2028? And the same with the women's 15s. I think just on the women's 15s side, one of the real challenges, because on the women's 7 side, we have a competition. Like, you don't have to like start your year being like, okay, where are we going to play? Who are we going to play against? We're lucky enough to have the World Series, and have that as kind of a consistent competition year to year. So the real challenge with women's 15s when I started was the fact that we had to kind of build our own competitions consistently. And one of the things we really focused on there was how we can make a season out of the year. So as opposed to it just kind of being like random events everywhere, we really focused on making the year, turning year into a season with a preseason and a development phase and a competition phase. But working with World Rugby over the last few years, hopefully there's some exciting developments that I don't want to talk about yet, but I think there'll be some things coming post the 2021 World Cup that will allow the 15s programs to have a lot more of that consistency. So those are just some of the challenges, but hopefully that answers the question.
Excellent. Another question coming in from Rue. It says Katie, but this could also be for Tiff as well, I believe. What were some of the things you learned coaching men?
Well, I think what I love to think about when you think about coaching individuals, I'll always talk about, you coach to the individual, not the gender. So there are definitely like certain sort of biases or components where people think you need to change the way that you coach for a specific group. And I personally think it's down to being athlete-centered in your coaching. So I had a really wonderful example of a cultural component of coaching, is where I had talked to an athlete when I was coaching in Laos, who was kind of from a different rural area altogether, and then another gentleman, and he wanted to have a conversation with basically his teammate to say, we need you to get to change your attitude, right? So how they looked at the different dynamics in which he could speak to this other individual. So I thought that was such a unique part versus the way that I had always been instructed to teach and coach. So I think the cultural component, or the cultural competence element of how you're coaching, goes even broader than beyond just the gender identification or what we're doing. So I think it's really just down to like taking the time to get to know individuals. And that is a challenge of all coaches. And the more you do that, I'll echo Tiff's idea around how are we making great humans and making great people. Because if you build that trust and that camaraderie with them, then that response is going to be positive with whoever it is that you're coaching.
Yeah, I mean, everything Katie said, I wouldn't be able to articulate it as well. But, from my experience too, on a lighter side of things, I do find that, and again, it might not be the gender, it might be because of the different levels, right? Like my experience with Rooney especially, the challenges are very different. They're paid to be there. So versus WPL, where, these women pay for everything, and they're there after a full-time. So the stress levels are very different. And, you know, if we're going back to, we're coaching people, but we're teaching a sport, like Katie said, you are really responding to the individual. I guess my only example would be my Monroe team, because they're same age, same resources. The women and the men, I find that, you know, sometimes with the women's, they would like just stand there and wait till I completely go through all the instructions, and they want to know each step before they go away confidently to complete it. And the boys are just like already taking off, and I haven't even finished. And then it takes us the same amount of time to finish a thing because I'm having to pause the boys to re-explain what, you know, what they cut me off with at the start. But again, that's just on the lighter side of things, and speaking specifically about my Monroe team. But yeah, it's all good fun.
Excellent, thank you. Zess, over to you now. A question that's just come in via WhatsApp. What is your advice for players who want to cross from a player into a referee? I know you and I are friends. I've heard you speak before about how, you know, it's difficult once you finish your career, and now that you've retired, you kind of have that what's next sort of moment. And what advice would you give someone who wants to pick up the whistle?
Yeah, I mean, the transition from playing is always tough. I definitely always tell people, like, don't cut your playing career short. Like, don't leave playing because you think there's something greater out there for you. I'm super grateful that I continue to play, you know, into my 30s, and decided to transition to refereeing. Actually, at like a bit of an older age for a referee, to be honest. But once you sort of make the decision you want to give it a try, there's local organizations everywhere. So wherever you are in sort of North America, you'll be able to tap into a local society. And from there, it's honestly just going for it and being prepared to be imperfect. I remember, like, I thought my first high school game, I needed to know all of the laws, I needed to know all of my signals, and not realizing that, like, you're literally just there to facilitate a game of rugby, and you know more than the kids do. And as long as everybody's safe, then, like, play on, you know? So just not being afraid to make mistakes your first run out, and not waiting. Like, I put it off. I got certified in like 2012. I think we all did as part of the National Sevens program. And I just had that fear in the back of my mind. I was like, oh, I don't know. I don't really know how to referee. And I waited till I retired to start it. But I probably would have learned a thing or two if I'd been refereeing throughout my career. So just get out there and give it a go. Well
said. Quinnis, over to you now, being our one panelist who's from the Caribbean. What would you say to a young female rugby player who's either an athlete or transitioning out of their athletic career and wants to find some type of opportunity within the game of rugby? What advice would you give them?
So my advice to that person or people listening in would be to see where the need is and what their interest is as well. And therefore, I think with need and interest, they would find their fit. So I was interested, and if I could just use my story as an example, I was interested in the growth of the women's game, and there was a need as well, because there wasn't anybody else doing it. And, you know, I would say courageous to pick up that mantle and create a lot of opportunities for a lot of girls. And I mean, I had no idea what I was doing, right? I just know something needed to be done, and if not me, who else would do it, kind of attitude I had. So I would say that would be the start, and then get educated, as Katie, lament, get educated in the space so that you can make informed decisions and inform platforms to continue to do the work that you're interested in, and more opportunities for development and growth will open up for you. And also look for those opportunities, because sometimes they hide as hard work. it hides as hard work, but somebody has to do it. And once you're willing to just get out there and do it, you know, the opportunities, and people trust you more to do more. You get more work, but, you know, at least you would be interested in doing it.
Absolutely, well said. Well, we're about 10 minutes over time here. I think we're having some fantastic discussion. I want to pose one more question to everyone, and I want everyone to have a chance to provide their thoughts as we sort of get close to wrapping up here. This one was sent in by Erin Kennedy, who we all know and have worked with. She said, "You all have been in your roles for a while now. If you could go back and give your younger self any advice," well, that's my dog, by the way. My puppy's barking at something. If you could go back and give your younger self any advice, what would you say? Would you change any steps you took or do things differently? And I'm gonna go with Emilie. You're up first.
What would I do differently?
Yeah, so if you could go back and talk to your younger self, what would you say, and what would you recommend or change? What advice would you give?
Run into Julianne Zussman with your head. That's what I would have said. That concussion,
My
I
cheek
think,
is still numb. It's still numb here, Emilie. 3 broken bones.
Sideways. Seriously, that is what happened. Anyway, what would I say? Yeah, I mean, I probably would just, I think like the panelists have already given like such really incredible advice. So I would probably take some of the stuff they just said and get my younger self to watch this recording. Because there's just some things around like, you know, play as long as you can, you know, enjoy every moment of that you have to be physically playing. But start to, you know, use the opportunities that you have available while you're playing, or, you know, the other thing to explore what you really want to do. I mean, I loved what was said around your passion and the need. And I always kind of use the expression with our players and teams, which is like, find the gap and fill it. And if you do, you know, if everybody does that, then we're going to be a pretty powerful team. So just kind of I would encourage myself, like as a younger player, to just kind of, or a younger person, to just kind of really do that and find the places where I, you know, really enjoy, and just stay there. Because the other thing about life is that it gets, you know, I've got a 2-year-old, you know, like you're going to grow up and you're going to have responsibilities that are outside of work, which is great. And you want to, I love my family. I want to spend as much time with them as I can. But when you're younger and you have, you know, none of that responsibility, you know, use all the time that you have to do things that you're passionate about and grow, so that you can really enjoy, you know, the family and stuff like that when you have that as well. So.
Excellent. Katie, over to you.
Well, I'll say, like, I love what Quinnis talked about. It hides as hard work. Like, do not be afraid of that opportunity to put your hand up to do it, and also value the work you do. So consistently talk about, hey, this is an opportunity I would like to be employed for. I'm a great volunteer, but I'm worth it, right? So have that value to yourself. And I think that makes a big difference. And then also share that with other individuals. Like, the more we're cultivating opportunities, you don't have to wait till you're older or to our age to mentor someone else too. Like, bring them along with you. And I think that'll be something that's really unique. And thinking about Julianne's talk about, like, I waited and how that works. The answer is, of course you're ready. Don't bother wasting time thinking about whether or not you're ready for an opportunity. Try it. The worst that happens is it doesn't go as well. And then you have multiple opportunities for it to just get better.
Excellent. Tiff.
Oh man, I would tell my younger self that, you know, you're not alone, and that your thoughts matter, and, you know, be more vocal, and probably to not take myself so seriously. Sometimes we get worked up, and then we get there, we're like, oh, that wasn't so bad at all. And then, you know, there was all that energy building up to it. But yeah, I would definitely tell myself to just have a go, trust your gut, And when you're a good person and your intent is to help everyone around you, things work out, you know. Might not look like what you envision at the time, but just trust the process.
Excellent. Quinnis?
Yes, so for my younger self, ooh, the amount of things I would tell her. So two things. As an administrator, I would say one of my mentors shared with me, don't get involved in the politics, but it doesn't mean that you cannot observe it. So don't turn a blind eye to it. I would also say for and on a personal level is don't take things personally. Sometimes as women we do take things personally. It's not about you sometimes. So that would be my two things that I would say to myself as a younger person coming up in the sports and leading. And I think for me that would have changed a lot of things for me.
Excellent.
In my career so far.
Zuss, over to you.
I'll end this on a light note here. I would tell my younger self, be nicer to referees. They're on your side. They're not out to get you. I promise. I promise they're not out to get you.
Perfect. So I have had a couple more questions come in. I hope everyone's okay with going for a few more minutes. We can do a quick stretch, just to take a quick moment. So this one's coming in from Neil Brooks, General Manager of Rugby Americas North. He said, so what would be the #1 ask for your committees or clubs to help change the culture and environment to promote women and girls in rugby? I'm like saving the doozies for the end. Does anyone have any thoughts on changing the culture for your clubs, your committees, your unions? Katie?
Well, I can say to start with, it's been mentioned a few times that if you can see it, you can be it. So think about one of the big projects we're working on right now within USA Rugby is thinking intentionally around the number of women and persons of color who are represented as educators, people teaching the coaches and referees and administrators. So if we're being deliberate and intentional around just specifically the metrics of the number of people doing this work, how is that representation? So when you think about when a space is created for someone who retires from that workforce or something else happens, and we say this in NCAA emerging athletics as well too, is the idea that if you're adding a new sport or a coach retires, that's a gap and an opportunity to place a woman in that role or to have diverse representation. So I think those are the best things you can do, is simply create opportunities for people to be in the positions to where the person teaching in the front of the class is a woman.
Excellent. Kwanieze, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I love the culture piece. I think the culture piece has to, one, first recognize our bias as an organization. What does our organization smell like when it comes to having women in leadership roles and at the forefront, as Katie says? And then what informs that is our policies. What are our hiring policies? Is it, specific to women in spaces or not? And is it competency? And, as Julianne shared, women are very humble in their pursuits. And therefore, the organization itself has to be intentional in creating the space as well.
I'll go next because this is something that my club at New York's been working on a lot. And we started off just sort of looking at our board members, and just people that are in positions making decisions, and just making sure that whoever's in that group represents, the majority, and that you have a voice, that represents all the different pockets of the community you're trying to to work with. And then obviously, if you don't have that, you know, what's your plan, you know, to create that depth? If you're meeting your coaching staff, and, you know, if you haven't, like, do you have any developing coming through, right? Because again, sometimes we can't change what we have at the moment, but the plan is, how can we grow from here? And what plans can we put in place to make sure that it is more inclusive? And then when you do have people in those tables, do they feel supported? Like, make sure you're not ticking a box and they're just a body there. Like, give them an opportunity to speak, you know? It's not gonna hurt you. Like, it's way better. There's so many, again, giving them the opportunity to be at the table, and then giving them a chance to be heard and feel supported as well.
Excellent, thank you. And so I've had two very similar questions, one from Jen Gray and one from an anonymous attendee that is asking about your networks and how you've grown your networks and how you've used your networks to assist in your career. The anonymous attendee, this is their question. Given that we've established the humility of women, how have you all in your different capacities created networks or tribes for women in rugby to find you and approach you? Do you think that they may think you're out of their league or unapproachable? So does anyone have any thoughts around creating a positive working network of women in your region, and how you've helped people younger than you or someone up and coming, and how you've used your network to advance in your career?
I'll share. I know that I do have challenges with creating networks. But I attended, I personally have challenges creating networks and maintaining networks. And I think because we go to forums, etc., and we meet each other, but I think it's, okay, what's next that we may have some issues with? And again, that comes with your plan for where you see yourself, and then you'll be able to use the networks accordingly. So that would have been my lesson on networking. And when it comes to being approachable or not, it's really about, as Julianne said, asking for a cup of coffee and breaking the ice in a familiar space, and then developing the relationship.
Yeah, I'll add in here real quick, but I think Katie mentioned it before. Again, it's about the humility, but I do feel like we, especially women, need to also start supporting other women. And if you find, it's us valuing that we have a lot to offer, right? So I have a lot of mentors, and most of them are guys, and it's them coming to me going, Tiff, if you need help, I'm here for you. And I sometimes think, shoot, like, I forget that the experience I've had, I don't see myself as someone who has a lot to offer, right? You know, and so once I get to that point, I'm like, no, I've got all this experience, then I'm like, I want to help these other women around me. And it's being intentional with what your goal is, and who's around you and the access. But I do think it's a two-way street. It's us putting ourselves out there and being really persistent about, you know, what we're worth and our goals. But then also, on the other hand, us looking at who's around and offering, you know, what we've also experienced, because you can still learn there as well. So.
I can offer just like a brief idea to say, who networks really well? Men network very well. So how can we not learn from the networking that they're already doing? So the reason that I hold the job that I have is I went to an informational meeting with the athletic director and the vice president and talked to all of them about the joyous, beautiful nature of the sport. I went home, slept on it, and said, you know what? A man would write to them and say, I would like this job, and here's why. And I did it, and it worked. So I think there's this idea around trying it. The worst they can say is no. And then really backing yourself to say, I'm actually intensely experienced. So I want to have this opportunity. And then I think that that's something that just asking, and then also asking, hey, I would like for you to be a mentor, let's have coffee or let's do something else. But I think really growing and building that idea of thinking who does it well, find out, regardless of gender, who networks well and learn from them.
Well said. Okay, that is the full list of questions that I've seen here. We've gone well over our 60-minute timeline here, but I knew that was going to happen with such an incredible group of women here on this panel. We had a fantastic discussion here tonight. I just want to say a big thank you to everyone who tuned in, joined as an attendee, and joined as a panelist. Tonight was one of many opportunities that Rugby Americas North is hoping to provide moving forward for women, for growing the game through the entire region. So discussions like this are really great for growing the game. So I just wanted to say thank you for everyone for tuning in and all the great feedback that we've had. As I'm sure you've probably seen on social media, Rugby Americas North is right smack dab in the middle of our Unstoppables campaign. So we're posting lots of photos and videos and stories about all the great things that are happening with women's rugby in our region. If anyone has any stories that they'd like us to submit to me that we could share online, anyone that's really going above and beyond to help women's rugby, please send to me. I'm happy to do that. And to all of our attendees, if you have a question for any of our panelists, you can get in touch with myself. I'm happy to direct that on to everyone. So thank you very much. Wherever you're tuning in from on this Tuesday afternoon or evening, on behalf of Rugby Americas North, just want to say thank you to everyone and have a nice evening.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thank everyone.
Bye, everyone. Great
Stars
to
and
see you.
Stripes tomorrow.
Oh yes, Stars and Stripes.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.